I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and I want to thank all of our panelists and speakers for participating in this quarterly mini jam. These events have been wildly successful for us, helping to drive over 700,000 subscribers to our YouTube channel in the first year alone. And of course, we are continuing to build the always-on community site at InsightJam.com, where you can connect with experts like you'll see today, along with colleagues and peers, and continue the conversation around enterprise technology. If you haven't already joined InsightJam.com, please do. And if you have, please invite a colleague to join as well. And again, thank you very much for being here and enjoy this event.
Solutions Review presents Insight Jam, an enterprise technology community.
Hello and welcome back to Insight Jam Live. My name is Jonathan Paula. I'm the Director of Multimedia and Events here at Solutions Review, and I am pleased to bring in our next group of speakers as we discuss the Next DeepSeek, security, governance, and privacy challenges in the AI era. We're joined by Mark, Jamal, Michael, and Sunil. Thank you, gentlemen. Pleasure to have you here with me. I'm excited to get into this conversation. Mark, you've done this before, and you've agreed to moderate once again, so I'll let you kick us off with some introductions. 30 seconds or so, tell the audience a bit about yourself.
So my name is Mark Diamond. I'm CEO and founder of a strategic consulting company called Contoral. We're the largest independent provider of both AI governance and information governance consulting services. And we work with about 30% of the Fortune 500, plus many small, mid-size, nonprofit, other types of organizations.
Excellent. Glad to have you here. Let's go next to Jamal. Welcome.
Thanks for having me again. My name is Jamal Ahmed, number 1 Privacy Pro UK, number 2 worldwide. And we offer leading brands the peace of mind that comes with protecting their data, making sure their reputation is protected, and making sure that all of their customers are protected as well through offering AI governance and data privacy solutions, regardless whether it's GDPR, CPRA, or even the PDPL.
Awesome. Appreciate all of that. Michael, over to you next.
Hi, thanks for having me back. I'm Michael Morrison. I'm a partner at a boutique consultancy called Dabling Consulting. We offer cyber cloud and automation management consulting services.
Okay, thank you very much. And Sunil, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sunil Suarez, founder of YDC, focused on AI governance solution, author of 13 books on data and AI governance. This is my second startup. I sold the previous one, focused on data governance to a private equity firm.
I'm going to start out with sort of a high-level question, which is how are organizations today balancing the need for AI governance with, the imperative to maintain robust security, privacy protections? I mean, how are organizations approaching this? And Jamal, why don't you kick us off? How are you seeing organizations sort of trying to balance these two?
Well, we're looking over at DeepSeek and seeing what lessons we can learn from there. And what we can learn from there is achieving that balance between AI innovation and those robust security and privacy measures is crucial. And there's 3 things that we're really focusing on with our clients. Number 1 is incorporating security and privacy by design. So embedding that security and those privacy considerations, some people like to call them TOMs, into the actual AI development lifecycle from the outset. And this proactive approach helps prevent those vulnerabilities, and it makes sure that we're compliant with all data protection regulations too. Number 2 is making sure that we're conducting regular security assessment, so implementing a continuous security evaluations so that we can identify and address any potential threats. And those regular assessments not only help us maintain the integrity of those AI systems, but it also protects the user data. And what we can see clearly is very important is maintaining that transparency with anyone who is going to be using the system. So clearly communicating how we're collecting the data, how we're using it, and also how we're protecting it. Being transparent allows us to foster that trust, and it also allows users to make informed decisions about what they do with their data.
Okay, thank you. Sunil, what are you seeing out there?
I think my comments are very similar to Jamal. I just want to up it up a level at the geographic level. I think there's a discussion now about really at, how do you balance innovation and regulation at the country level or the jurisdiction level? My personal opinion, right? Not necessarily grounded in fact, is that there's a 50-50 chance that the European Union AI Act might actually get watered down or delayed before the main start sometime in August next year. And the reason for that is the Europeans are looking at the US and all the venture capital money in the US and DeepSeek and saying, do we really want to focus just on regulation, or do we really need to balance innovation and regulation together? So if countries and jurisdictions have making that determination, I'm sure corporations need to do the same.
Michael, what do you feel?
Yeah, I think companies really need to have a game plan, and we're sitting here still at the early stages of this, very much in the Wild West. Organizations haven't heard of data lineage yet, built, let alone built any guardrails to understand it, to understand their integrity, to understand their security. It's become very organic kind of use of AI and LLMs inside of organizations, and security teams are racing to catch up.
And I'm going to agree with all of you, although I'll put a different spin on it. I think sometimes obviously a lot of the regulatory environments emerging from use of personal information and making decisions on individuals. And clearly, Europe that's not all, but much of what the European regulation is about. Many of the other regulatory. I think we have to separate what are the responsibilities of the developers of large language models and those actually using those systems. And those are sometimes different questions. And if you're implementing it, if you're using those systems either internally or some other type of application you're developing, I think the other question isn't just use of personal information, but corporate confidential, trade secrets, other things like that. And how do we effectively have a security plan that we can maintain data security classification standards where we can use that data effectively, but we're not inadvertently exposing or vitiating our intellectual property? And so when we were clients, we want to take a step back saying, okay, are we talking about what are the responsibilities of the Anthropics and the OpenAIs of the world? Are we talking about how we use it? Are we talking about that? And those are, I think, the fundamental questions that organizations need to begin with. And Jamal, you touched on this a little bit. I don't know if you can add on this. I mean, can we learn? I mean, DeepSeek, really very interesting to see, what they're doing, or at least claiming to do. Any more thoughts on any takeaways in the last month on what we're seeing from DeepSeek or not yet?
I mean, the most important thing to see is that, look, if you're not going to get things right, then countries will end up banning you. So Australia, Italy, and if they have any national security concerns, or if they believe you are practicing or allowing to be practiced invasive data policies, regulators are going to come and say, no, not for our country, and they're going to completely wipe you out. The challenge with that is if you're a listed company, that's going to have a huge impact on your shareholders. It's also going to have a huge impact on your reputation. And with tech companies, with AI still being a little bit frightening for some people, fascinating for others, or fascinately frightening, we need to get that balance right and make sure we position our products, we position our brands, we position our solutions as the ones that people can trust, that are open to do business everywhere we go across the globe.
I hear you. So, Neil, what again, and it's still top of news out there. What can we learn, or what lessons can we learn, and maybe they're lessons of caution from DeepSeek?
Yeah, so I think as AI governance professionals, we need to really understand regulations, and we also need to understand the technology. I wrote a blog a couple of weeks ago about DeepSeek, and if you just take DeepSeek natively, all the data is stored in China. It's just a fact. If you look at their terms of use, and if you look at the Chinese national intelligence law, it states clearly that DeepSeek or any Chinese company has a duty to the Chinese Communist Party and has to share the data. Fine. Now, I actually ran a little red teaming with DeepSeek, and I said, who's the dictator of the People's Republic of China? And it refused to give me an answer. Now, what a lot of companies like Perplexity AI, Amazon, AWS, Bedrock, Azure have done is they've embedded DeepSeek in their own environments, and they've tweaked the parameters because it's an open source model. So I went to Perplexity, and they actually give you an option in their main menu now to use the Perplexity hosted version of DeepSeek that's actually in the US, doesn't share the data with China, and I actually issued the same prompt about the Chinese Communist Party and dictatorship, and I actually got a half-decent answer back. AWS Bedrock does the same thing. They allow you to add additional guardrails to DeepSeek. For example, if you're McDonald's and you have a chatbot and you want to prevent a user of the chatbot from asking questions about Burger King or Yum Brands, it actually lets you implement those custom guardrails. So that's an example of companies taking DeepSeek or a technology like DeepSeek and adding additional guardrails.
Michael, I want to get a comment from you, and then I'll introduce Jeff. Michael, so Are the other developers taking note of what's happening to DeepSeek, or do you think that they still sort of feel like, well, these laws kind of really don't always apply to us?
I think everybody's watching what happens to DeepSeek, particularly foreign adversarial governments. I mean, one of my colleagues here started talking about what DeepSeek's terms of use are. It wasn't so long ago that we had a company called Cambridge Analytica scraping Facebook data. DeepSeek explicitly says that they collect every message, every file. It's all sent back to China. This could be incredibly damaging. So are U.S. Competitors or the European competitors taking note? They are, but so are some adversarial competitors.
It's interesting that the Chinese government have very strict controls on privacy for everybody but the Chinese government. I want to introduce Jeff. Jeff, you want to give us just a real brief introduction, and then I'll ask you the question, what do we learn from DeepSeek? Jeff?
Sure. Hey guys, Jeff Jokish. I'm the CXO at Obscure IQ. I'm a data privacy researcher, and I also help individuals and companies recover lost privacy, primarily by helping them delete their digital footprint and understand their digital footprint risk. But I also study a lot of AI because, frankly, AI is starting to sort of impact what open source technology allows people to do and makes open source intelligence more accessible to the common person. You wanted me to answer a question about what DeepSeek is allowing?
Yeah, just are there any lessons learned from DeepSeek that real quick?
Yeah, I think, I think it's really more about leapfrogging. I think that is the biggest lesson to learn, right? That change can come out of any sector and from any place to sort of impact everything we know about what models can do. And I think that's the biggest lesson, but rather, anything else. I mean, there are probably not hundreds, but a whole lot of lessons, right? But that's the biggest one for me, that, it could be, a new model comes out of Brazil tomorrow, right? That upends everything. And I think we're really just at the very beginning of what LLMs and AI in general are going to bring in terms of change for our society. And that's why, as a sort of data privacy analyst, I'm sort of concerned, because rapid change means a lot for trying to recover our privacy and keep our privacy when all of this personal data is sort of getting eaten up by these models.
I like all you're saying, although I'll add one in my own closing part on this one question, which is, I'm very hopeful that DeepSeek really does represent some significant innovation. And if that's the case, I think there'll be a lot of data centers with a lot of extra space out there. I'm still a little bit from Missouri. I'd still want to see it tried and true. And I'm not 100% saying, hey, yeah, this is the innovation they claim. And I'd be happy to be proved wrong. And I may well be proved wrong on that. But I'm still a little bit out there on saying if DeepSeek is everything that we're hoping it is. All right, so I'm going to jump into the next question. How are the regulatory approaches to AI evolving globally? And this, we could spend hours on this. What are the challenges does it create for the organization across multiple territories? And Sunil, you sort of led into this. How are we seeing the evolving? You already talked about what you think is going to happen with the EU, but what does your crystal ball say?
So I think somebody mentioned there's about 1,000 AI regulations around the world. Generally, what organizations will try to do is say, okay, if there's multiple regulations, we operate as a multinational in multiple jurisdictions, let's try to comply with the most comprehensive legislation. That's probably the EU AI Act, right? There's clearly still at the back of people's minds what's going to happen from a regulatory framework perspective. Are the regulators going to take their foot off the brakes a little bit when it comes to regulatory compliance and the push? That's certainly there.
Michael, how do you see this evolving? Are we going to see this continuous, or are we going to see a little bit of backpedaling in that? What do you think?
We're currently provided in the U.S. with very light regulation of models. So it seems unlikely, at least in the U.S., that this is going to change.
Do you think that the states are going to come up with or are going to fill the void on that? Or
California will likely move in just like they often do in such a circumstance. Europe, totally different animal. Europe's been kind of almost always leading the pack with regulation, but that regulation is often cumbersome, right? And Europe often lags behind because of it. And China, I mean, DeepSeek, this is all about DeepSeek. I mean, China is laying the groundwork to effectively or more effectively dominate the information space. DeepSeek is maybe not the opening volley, but a big volley.
Jamal, and again, this is a real interesting topic. Are there any trends that we can pick out, or again, we're talking about this evolution out there? What are you seeing? Now, I always like asking these questions because I'm asking you forecast, and that's always fun to put us all on the spot to be able to do that. Jamal, let me put you on the spot. What do you think? What's going to happen?
Yeah, so regulations will continue to evolve worldwide, whether we like it or not, regardless of what JD Vance says. And if we don't get anything at a federal level in the US, then companies, industries will start taking care of those things for themselves, as we've seen in the past with data privacy and other regulations. So the most important thing is, if we know this is going to come, and I think Sunil just said there's about 1,000 different pieces that are either being drafted or going through the first round, waiting for the assent to come into law. 3 things that we need to do. Number 1 is we need to establish some kind of a global compliance team. So this team is going to be dedicated to monitoring and interpreting AI regulations across the different regions or jurisdictions which are exposed to. And this team must ensure that AI practices align with those local laws and standards. Then we need to make sure that we have some kind of a flexible compliance framework. And we need to make sure that we develop something that's adaptable when it comes to compliance frameworks, so we can customize it to meet the varying regional requirements. And that flexibility will allow for swift adjustments to regulatory changes. Now, most of the time, I like to find the most strictest one and build it according to that. So at least we know we have all the bases covered, then it means less changes moving to and fro. And the final thing that I would say we should do is engage in internal collaborations. So we should participate in global forums and industry groups so we stay informed about the regulatory trends, and then we can contribute to the development of these harmonized standards. And that collaboration allows us to come together with some kind of a unified approach internally to AI governance rather than this siloed, fragmented approach which can cause havoc.
Jeff, what do you talked a little bit about the evolution of this. Well, how do you see the evolution continuing?
Well, for regulation, I think enforcement's probably going to be lacking for a while, but where the rules are really going to coalesce, whether those are sort of industry enforced or, developed in a variety of different ways, I think what they're going to really coalesce around is sort of 3 different things. One is sensitive use cases, right? Whether that's sort of like high risk stuff, which the EU AI Act sort of focuses on, whether that is sensitive types of data, whether that could be like biometric information, facial recognition, or other types of things, or whether you're going to actually have organizations making impact assessments of those certain situations. So that's sort of the 3 things that I think most of the laws are going to focus on, rather than sort of saying that you can't do specific things. You're going to get some laws like the EU AI Act that says that these are prohibitive actions, but for the most part, I don't see that that's going to happen in most places.
Interesting. I guess I'll weigh in this too. We believe the drive. I don't think there's going to be any consolidation or any harmonization of regulations. I think we're going to keep on doing it, in part driven by use of personal information, decision making. But I also think there's going to be an element of labor protection in this. Hey, we got to prevent all these jobs from going away, and I think a lot of countries out there are going to be happy to prohibit it because they're looking to do that. When we work with our clients, we say, but be careful on this. It's easy to try and boil the ocean and look at every regulation out there. And we sort of like to go in the opposite direction, which is how can we find sort of this AI governance agility? How can we find all the common areas to the extent possible and build our strategy around that, and then do local exceptions as necessary, or use case exceptions as necessary? Because I think the big challenge is go to conferences and they'll spend the entire conference talking about all these different laws, but that's not as helpful as saying, hey, how do we sort of figure this out and figure out what's the, as we say, the agility, what are the common areas on this and how we build our strategy around that? Because the problem is, if we build the strategy today, it's going to change. And so we have to be able to figure out our own perspective, how we get some agility associated with that. All right. How should responsibility for AI governance be distributed across technical teams, legal departments, and executive leadership? I mean, if you're working within an organization, Michael, what are you seeing in terms of how, an organization is there like a person that runs AI governance? Is it a group of people? Is it, what works?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's still very nascent. So there's not a lot of data out there on success, even though there's a lot of trials going on across lots of organizations. So what works is a little bit is a little bit of a crystal ball. I'll suggest that, unfortunately, the same thing that worked when we started talking about automation projects, and the same thing that worked when we started talking about machine learning, and the same, it's the same. It's just the next tech kind of along that path, and that at most large corporations, we find that, unfortunately, everyone needs to be involved, right? Which is never a recipe for moving fast. But you need to have a risk management framework like NIST or Databricks. Probably need to layer in a maturity model so that it's not just it's not just an academic exercise. And then make sure that all of the teams are at the proverbial table, so that they can ensure there are guardrails. And unfortunately, that's technical, that's legal, that's leadership, that's all of them.
Sneal, what is it? Are we having get everybody involved? Is that going to be too big of a party?
No, Michael's right? So you generally have, an AI governance council or a steering committee that includes folks from all these different groups. There's typically an intake process around AI use cases, and then there's some type of risk assessment framework. Maybe it's the European Union to triage use cases. Now the question is, who actually leads it? So I've seen legal departments, much like with data privacy, you might have the data privacy lawyers who lead AI governance, right? I was at the International Association of Privacy Professionals last day in Brussels. Lots of data protection officers extending their GDPR roles to cover AI governance as well. But then you've got the CIO and the technologists who also have to be involved, because the technologies are changing so fast, it's hard for the regulations to keep up. So AI agents are great, right? The European Union talks about human accountability and human in the loop, but these agents are trying to take humans out of the loop. So really tying together technology and the legal department is extremely important, along with the lines of business.
Thank you. Jeff, how do we approach this?
Well, I think I have to agree with Michael and Sunil. You got to really involve everybody, which is also a recipe for problems, right? You can't move fast if you involve everyone. I don't know that there's a really good solution here. I'm not really sure what to suggest, right? Because if you don't involve everyone, you risk having a substandard solution. If you do involve everyone, how do you get everything done correctly, right, and quickly?
I sort of like your honesty and you're saying, hey, this is a bit of a struggle. Jamal, what have you seen?
Yeah, so I support what Sunil and Michael are saying, and I hear the concerns from Jeff, and these are the same kind of conversations we're having with stakeholders all the time, right? But look, here's the truth. Effective AI governance does require collaboration across various organizational levels. It doesn't mean that every single person needs to be involved, but it does mean there needs to be collaboration from every single department. And there's three key things that we're doing that's really helping us. So number one is defining clear roles and responsibilities. If we assign specific AI governance tasks to the relevant departments, making sure there's accountability so they have clarity when it comes to the decision-making processes, that's really going to help them move forward confidently. Number two is make sure that we foster cross-functional collaboration by encouraging regular communication between the technical teams, the legal departments, and even the executive leadership so they can all align on these AI initiatives, meet the organizational goals, and maintain those ethical standards. And finally, provide specialized training. We need to offer training programs that equip all stakeholders with the necessary knowledge to manage their specific AI-related risks effectively. And that way, everybody's empowered, everybody comes to the table, and everybody contributes to the ongoing goals and missions of the company effectively with the AI governance in place.
I like a lot of what you're saying. Um, AI governance, you can argue, is relatively new, and some may debate that in terms of the machine learning on that. But for most organizations, AI governance is new. But governance is not new. And I'm going to pull lessons that we've had for the last 20 years in terms of the worlds of information governance. And we strongly believe that we've seen it has to be a steering committee. Let's put together a charter. Let's get together roles and responsibilities. Let's get, legal, compliance, risk, obviously IT, development, technology, data governance, information governance. Let's get all the players early in the room to start with. I think sometimes there's a tendency, especially from the technology teams, like, I don't want to really bring the legal people in because they're just going to stop me and I got to get this out. And I appreciate that. But we coach a lot of legal teams saying you want to be there because actually you're going to make this go faster because you can help them avoid mistakes. You can help them redoing. And yeah, it is a little awkward to get a good group together and who's doing what. But if you could do that initially, we find these initiatives, AI governance goes much faster. You can get to production much more quickly because there's a role for everybody. There's different, the legal can talk, the compliance can talk about the emerging regulations, technology, the business units. We want them all part of this. And so don't try and do this with a small group and then tell everybody later, go big early and drive that, because that's and we've seen it for years in other governance. This is from our perspective, this is not a new lesson. This is a very tried and true area to be able to do that.
I just want to say, I think you're exactly right there. If you're not doing data governance right, if you're not doing data privacy right, you're probably not going to be doing AI right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you're talking, information governance, I'm going to talk about a plain old topic called records management. Well, a lot of the data quality issues that organizations are looking with retrieval augmented generation, which we think is how most organizations will be using it, really have the root in good records management or data management, or that goes out there. So a lot of these core areas, and somebody else was going to add something too.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. Again, if we look at what's worked historically for new initiatives, absolutely steering committee. I think all of us aligned in some flavor of that, but also leadership kind of in the trenches, right? Organizations that have somebody in charge of their automation, fill in the blank, center of excellence, guild, team, whatever, have far greater success rates. And I think that it's the same lesson is going to be applied to AI when there is somebody managing the use case intake form or process, and there is somebody, usually the same person, evangelizing AI across the organization. You're going to have they're leading or at least preparing the governance committee. You're going to have greater success.
Michael, let me ask you a question. Do you think the problem with AI governance, the challenge and problem, I don't want to say problem, challenge AI governance right now is that there aren't enough people in-house individuals stepping up for leadership, or there's too many people wanting to be leaders? Which of those, or both?
I think that we're still so nascent that there's very little expertise. There's a lot of self-appointed evangelists, and there are a lot of technologists or technology-inclined people who are raising their hand. Kudos to them to help lead the charge. But there's a huge gap in information inside of these organizations about, there is no best practice yet, as an example.
And Sunil, Jamal, I want to invite you. I mean, this is an issue a lot of organizations struggling with. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, from my experience, there aren't enough professionals stepping up right now and saying, hey, I want to get to know this. I want to understand this. A lot of people are like, okay, a little bit too spooky for me. Especially some of the more mature organizations where they've had somebody in like a general counsel role for maybe some years. They've just got their head around the data privacy stuff. It's just like, it's too much for me. And they're kind of burying their head in the sand a little bit, hoping there's going to be some magic answer that comes. But look, I've got news for you. No magic answer is going to come. There is no magic pill. we actually have to step up. We have to learn about AI. We have to learn about the risks. We need to be able to empower ourselves or our teams to do those fundamental rights impact assessments. And ultimately, how you do one thing is how you do anything. We need to get the clarity so we can confidently make credible decisions.
Are these really hard problems to solve?
Yes. Just to agree with Jamal, yes, the technology is moving so rapidly that what might have been valid, 6 months ago is not valid today. Take DeepSeek, right? You can't make a decision about DeepSeek without understanding some of the underlying technologies. And just going back to agents, right? Agents are now autonomous. They're making decisions without human involvement. So when you think about stewardship, you think about governance, they always talk about a human in the loop. But as I said earlier, how do you deal with AI agents who are making decisions autonomously and not having humans at all? So that's a real challenge, the evolution of the technology.
One of the we deal with a lot of in-house counsel at our clients, and one of the lessons we tell them or advice we give them is you should be able to understand everything that you need to know about the technological components of generative AI. Not to say that you're going to be able to go in the nitty-gritty, but somebody should be able to explain sort of what it's doing and how it's working at a high enough level. And typically, if somebody can explain that, then they sometimes don't really know enough. And likewise, when we work with the technologists at our clients, we say, hey, we want to go down it, but part of what we need to do is be good explainers to say, because parts of this are incredibly complicated, but how it works is something that, when well spoken, even a layperson should be able to understand. And so we want to get everybody sort of communicating, and because a lot of times the legal folks are just afraid, oh, this stuff is too complicated or it's too hard. And parts of it are, but what you need to know, we should be able to explain it. I mean, I imagine the rest of my panelists spent a lot of time explaining how generative AI works.
Yeah, I'll go to the beginning of the process rather than the actual black box of the tech, because I agree with all of you on the tech that we have to be better at explaining it. But the process prior to the implementation, prior to any particular new agent being built, deployed, etc., is very similar. We need to have good process hygiene. We need to have clean data. We need to understand our data. And that hasn't changed. It's still a problem at organizations, but we know what the solution is. We just have to go through the steps to get there. And then we can start deploying the next generation of technology.
One of the challenges with generative AI, we need good data quality. And so one of the conversations is we can use generative AI to get better data quality to then use generative AI. It's an interesting way of doing that. All right. So what frameworks or approaches are proving to be most effective for conducting comprehensive risk assessments of AI? I mean, is it NIST? Is that the be all end all? I mean, we talk about Databricks, or is that too focused? Are we looking at the wrong way to be able to do that? Jeff, I'm going to let you lead off on this. What do you think are the right approaches or frameworks to be able to use?
Well, I mean, I think everybody is looking to NIST, or a lot of people are, just because it was one of the first ones out. And it's a good way to go. I wouldn't say that there's anything I've seen wrong with it. But inevitably there are going to be more frameworks that come out that may have some more nuance to them.
Jamal, what are you recommending, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I mean, I support what Jeff's saying. We like to use established risk management frameworks, and NIST is a great one that's established because it allows you to systematically identify and then mitigate those AI risks. It's important to use frameworks that are trusted by yourselves, that are trusted by your peers, and that are trusted by stakeholders, because then not everything is foreign. Because when you talk about the frameworks and how you identify the risks, if you can relate it back to an established or well-known framework, then it adds more credibility to your findings and there's less pushback. So these frameworks give us structured guidelines for assessing these potential threats. But beyond these frameworks, we need to perform bias and fairness evaluations. That means we need to be able to assess AI systems for biases that could lead to unfair outcomes. When we find that there are unfair outcomes which was unintended, then we need to find some kind of corrective measure to make sure there is equitable treatment of all user groups. And that sometimes might mean that we need to engage external stakeholders or external auditors. So we can involve third-party experts who come and do impartial evaluations of our AI systems, and they'll give you an unbiased perspective on the potential risks as well as mitigation strategies.
Jamal, do you think organizations are really taking the risk component of it seriously? I mean, they're worried about it, but are they really putting their systems, their applications through the right risk processes? Or are they going, yeah, that may happen, but I'm so busy to get this out in the market, I'm not going to announce it, but I'm going to go lightly on the risk part of it?
That's a great question. In my experience, what I've seen is largely dictated by the place they're in. So if they're in a highly regulated environment like Europe, they're more likely to lean forward and take it seriously. But also if you're in a highly regulated industry, like my financial services clients, they're very wary. They don't want to touch anything unless it's been approved, because risk, reputation, trust, all of those things are super important. Whereas if you go to more like a creative agency, that's, let's say they're doing writing blog posts for millions of customers and they're using AI and they're scraping anything from anywhere, they just want to get results out. There's no regulation. The jurisdictions doesn't really apply to them too much because they can operate from pretty much anywhere. And so it all comes down to the actual size of the company, how mature they are, which jurisdiction they're in, and if they're in a heavily regulated industry or not.
So Neil, what are you seeing on this? Are you've seen organizations approaching it the right way?
They are. I think they're a little schizophrenic, right? Because you can look at the EU AI Act, right? That's a NIST. I think is good, but it is not as in depth as the EU AI Act. If you think about the implied framework with the EU Act, but then also you got to overlay other cybersecurity frameworks for AI. So Article 15 of the EU AI Act says accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity. They tell you what to do. They don't tell you how to. But if you look at MITRE Atlas, or you look at OWASP Top 10 LLM or LlamaGuard, they get into more detail on what are the types of attack vectors and the landscape for AI security versus the EU AI Act. So layering in some of those other cybersecurity frameworks is also very helpful.
But one of the criticisms against the EU AI Act is that, you're very limited in your ability to make decisions about individuals. We've been using technology to make decisions about individuals for decades. I mean, and now because it's a new technology, we can't use it. I mean, what's your thought on that or to that criticism?
That's actually very interesting. So the GDPR and the EUA Act, as you probably know, are a little bit contradictory. So the GDPR says you cannot use data when it comes to certain categories of data, like people's ethnicity, I believe, to make decisions. And the EUA Act, I think Article 10, talks specifically about, well, you have to demonstrate, as Jamal said, that you're not being biased. Well, if you don't have the data around ethnicity, you can't make a decision. So now the EUA Act sort of has this workaround where they talk about the debiasing exception, where you can collect data for the express purpose of demonstrating that you're not biased. So it's a good example of these regulations sort of getting twisted.
Michael, I'll let you add on that, but I'm going to sort of comment on there. I'm always a little bit bothered when people say we can't have bias in generative AI. AI is all about bias. It's about selecting the good data from the bad information. I mean, we don't want unintended bias, but sometimes I hear this to say, hey, we want to do there. Jamal, you were going to add something real quick.
Yeah, so being in the UK and part of Europe, I just thought it's probably worthwhile stepping in to defend the GDPR and the...
We would, and again...
Hammered a little bit. So look, if you look at the GDPR, it's actually a brilliant piece of law. Yes, there is lots of things that we need to comply with it, but it's actually very principle-based. It doesn't say, it's not very prescriptive. You can do this, you can't do that. And when it comes to automated decision-making, what it says is, if you're going to use a machine to automatically make a decision about someone that could have a legal impact or some kind of significant effect on them without human intervention, then you can't do that unless there's a law that requires it or you have their permission. And then when we look at the EU AI Act, what that's saying is there are certain things that are specifically protected characteristics that could be used to discriminate against people. And you shouldn't use those types of information if you can help it. Now, if you have a genuine need to do that, then of course you can do it. So for example, let's say we're working with a hospital and they need to pick up that ethnicity because they know people of certain ethnic background are more likely to be diabetic if they follow a certain diet. They're allowed to pull that information in, But as a blanket way, we shouldn't just be collecting information that could be used to discriminate against someone. And the reason we have these laws in place is because of what Hitler did to the Jewish population and wiped 6 million innocent people off the face of the earth because he was able to collect their ethnicity. That's what we're trying to protect against. So yes, we do have these regulations in place in Europe, but they come from the lessons that we learned from World War II. And that's why we put together as a globe the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, and all EU laws, the GDPR, the EU AI Act, goes down to the European Convention on Human Rights, which was inspired by the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So it's easy to bash regulations, but I think sometimes it's also important to remember why Europe has this approach. We've had 2 world wars right here. We've seen the devastation, and we want to make sure things like that don't happen again. We want to make sure people's fundamental rights are respected. And ultimately, that's why they bring these regulations to the table.
Jamal, I think you had a good point there, which is the regulators don't look at themselves as regulator. They look at them, a lot of them, Europeans in particular, look at it, we're trying to do the right thing. Michael, you want to add to this?
Yeah, so I just want to go back to the first question, or the original part of this question, which is what frameworks are proving effective. I'll suggest there are not a lot of frameworks out there compared to the other techs. We are still nascent, as I keep saying, and most of them are reasonable. There are very few senior leadership teams in this country that would say, don't use NIST, or NIST is respected, NIST is good enough, NIST is fine. But they're all missing pieces, or said another way, they're often very descriptive, not very prescriptive. So they're missing pieces. What technical risks exist to the models? How do you manage system failure? How do you manage unpredictable behavior? How are you going to deal with scalability? What vulnerability to attacks exists? And none of the frameworks deal with this very effectively. Not yet. And then there are frameworks that the boards and the senior leadership team haven't heard of that are somewhat prescriptive. One of my co-panelists here mentioned a bunch of them. Those can be more useful in actually moving down into the weeds and understanding what to do rather than just describing what you've already done. I think this is going to change over the next few years, but that's where it is today.
And I'm going to agree with you. Our perspective on the frameworks, we love NIST as a framework. It's excellent at identifying risk, but that's just actually a small part of AI governance. The same way that use of personal information is important, but only part of it. I mean, there's the compliance requirements. There's obviously the data security classification and that component, making sure that you're having the right data. There's obviously safety, there's accuracy, there's ethical part of it. And so I worry sometimes focusing on, and we've had some clients that say, hey, we're basing our whole AI governance on the NIST framework. And we're saying, well, that's great for looking what the potential risk for you be, but you may be missing some. And so we like to take a broader view of that. And Jeff, you were going to add a comment to that. I want to make sure I can get you in that.
Yeah. The one point I wanted to bring up is, I think all of these frameworks can bring a lot of value, but there's an underlying piece that I don't think that they necessarily frame particularly well, and that's explainability in these models. The models are getting more and more complex, and we don't necessarily understand how they work, right? We have these black boxes that we're putting a lot of data into.
And they're not deterministic either, correct?
Yeah, right. We're asking a question and out pops an answer, and we don't know why that answer came out, right? We can't understand what exactly happened between, putting the question in and the answer coming out. And so that lack of explainability is problematic. For a lot of different reasons. I mean, there are some laws that sort of require explainability, including, like GDPR. But, aside from the legal aspects, right? If we don't understand why the answer is coming back, how can we really, understand what the model's doing, right? And that should cause some consternation in ourselves, right? For just knowing what our businesses are doing, if our businesses are built on those models.
And some of the proposed regulations actually say, hey, I want to know exactly how this stuff works, which is
right.
Sometimes giving a lot of heart palpitations to the developers. All right. We've covered a lot of really good topics. Now I want to go back to our panelists and give them a chance, for the listeners to this. What are some of the take homes? If you want somebody to come home, what are some of the important take homes you want the listeners of this to have? And I'm just going to go around. Jamal, why don't you start out? What do you want people to remember, or what's the important thing that they take home from this?
So I think the most important thing to realize is when we got something we're working on, when we're excited about something, when something's new, when something's complicated, we tend to lean in. And when you lean in, you kind of forget the bigger picture. So the first thing I would say is just take a step back. Have a look at everything that's going on. What are the regulations? What are the frameworks? What's the industry? What are the other things that you need to consider? And who do you need to have those conversations with? And who do you need to bring to the table so you can make better decisions more effectively? And I think if everyone just took a step back and just asked those questions, then we'd get much more powerful results. We'd get those things right first time. And AI by design, privacy by design, all of those elements would pretty much take care of themselves better than if we just lean in and forget to have those conversations until it's too late or it's going to be too expensive to make any changes.
Jeff, what do you think? What do you want people to walk away with?
Well, yeah, I think actually maybe this last point that I just brought up, right, is try to understand what your models are actually doing. The more you understand what your models are doing, the more easily you're going to fit within any kind of framework, and the more easily you're going to be able to provide that level of governance around it. And I think that's the point I'd like to leave with everyone. If you can't understand your models, you're going to have a hard time really doing anything with your data governance.
Okay. So Neil, what do you want people to walk away with?
I think just starting with a use case registry for your AI use case is always a place everyone starts, and then doing a risk assessment. Something we have seen, though, is people think about AI use cases as Gen AI, but you've got a lot of commercial off-the-shelf apps that also have AI. And now all of a sudden, you become a deployer under the EU AI Act because you're deploying those apps that might have embedded AI. So just take a more broader view of your AI use cases and not just your Gen AI use cases.
I love it. Michael?
Go a different direction. I think that there's a tension between capability and security with all of the use cases, with all of the capabilities. And as a panel, we talk a bunch about governance and leadership, etc. And the way that AI typically starts in large organizations is very skunkworks, kind of a team here, a team there. And if we're going to manage the tension between capability and security, some centralization needs to occur, leadership needs to occur, kind of not just bottom up, but top down also.
And I'm going to add, if the one take home I want on this is, I'm going to date myself. When the internet sort of came out and people wanted to use the internet for the first time, it was like, well, it's not safe. And companies that could take advantage of it actually had a huge competitive advantage. And there's some that didn't, and some of those companies are not around. But it was technical, it was scary, it was confusing, all these different components. We've been here before. Yes, it's a new technology, but we know how to do that. And these days, if you have a web-enabled application, most companies have a very repeatable process. Let's look at this, and some have require more diligence than others to be able to do that. I think when we look at generative AI, it's the same thing. We got to get all the stakeholders in the room, figure out how we're going to be able to use it, develop policies and processes, but then make it repeatable, because we're going to be able to do that. And let's focus on the first one, but let's not get so overwhelmed that this is, completely new. We know what's going to happen, because we've been, part of good governance is knowing how to work with uncertainty and work with risk and pull these in, but still get a product that is, compliant and secure and safe, but still usable. And so let's draw back on the lessons on the past. Right. And then I have one final question for our panelists. We've talked about all the things that we want to do. What's the one mistake that you want, if you could broadcast the world, be careful about doing this, the one pitfall or something you can have organizations to be able to do? I'm going to go the same order. Jamal, what's the one pitfall? What's the one thing to be careful about or avoid doing?
I think the one place people make most mistakes is assuming that just because you're deploying an AI solution, you have less obligations or there's nothing for you to think about. It's not just for developers, it's also for people deploying those solutions as well. So I would say if you're deploying, make sure you still carry out your AI risk assessments.
Okay. Jeff, what do you think? What's the one, if you could preach? I guess we could preach. What would you preach to avoid the mistake?
Sorry, my mind just blanked on me. Can you skip me for a sec?
I'll go to Sunil. Sunil, what's the one lesson or what's the one thing to avoid?
I agree with Jamal. I think when he talks about deploying AI, we call it shadow AI. So you have AI that's not out there in the lights, it's in the shadows, and you're deploying AI that might be embedded in other applications, and they still are subject to AI risk assessments.
Okay, I like that. Michael, what do you think?
I think organizations need to very carefully evaluate the data that goes into the models, the data that the models are vacuuming up, and who has access to them, where that data resides, how it can be used by adversaries.
Okay. And then Jeff, back to you. What do you think? What's the one thing you want to caution people or help them avoid?
I think overall that AI has a lot of potential. As you sort of stated, I wouldn't be scared of deploying AI, but when you're deploying it, I think you need to make sure that you understand what it is you want to accomplish. And the data that you're imbibing outside of your foundational model, especially if you're imbibing custom data sets, make sure that the accuracy of that is very high and that you understand what it is that model is going to output, because that's really going to be very telling in terms of how successful you're going to be with sorry, my language is losing.
We're getting it. So basically to be careful what you take in, because that's going to come out.
Yeah. Sorry for the faux pas there.
I like what everybody said. I guess the thing I add to that, and I'm going to go back to a lesson that when I first started work as a software development engineer, just say a long time ago, my first boss had really good advice. He said the biggest mistakes in projects are usually made in the first 5 minutes. Sometimes when we don't want to make this a torturous process, we don't want to stop what we're doing, but sometimes just before we jump into something, are we engaging the right people? Are we doing the right thing? Are we asking what we're doing? That 5 minute pause, before we jump in and do something. If you do the root analysis, the biggest mistakes, again, I'm going to argue that most of them happened in the first 5 minutes of the conception of a project. And that's if you're mindful about that, I think you can be much smarter for that and do that. So with that, we're almost out of time. I'm going to hand it back to Jonathan. Jonathan, do you want to sort of close us out here?
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you moderating, and great discussion, one and all. It was a pleasure listening in over the last 53 minutes or so. Before we wrap up, though, I'd love to invite each of you an opportunity to promote your company solution, LinkedIn profile, book, podcast, wherever you'd like to send the audience. The floor is yours. We'll go counterclockwise and start with Sunil.
Yeah, so Sunil Suarez, founder of YDC. We focus on AI governance solutions. You can go to yourdataconnect.com or find me on LinkedIn. I've got a couple of books, one on AI governance and one on agentic AI governance, freely downloadable, free of charge. You don't need to put in a form or anything like that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next up, let's go to Michael.
I'm Michael Morrison, partner at Daybland Consulting. We help clients with designing and implementing secure processes and governance for new and existing technologies, including AI. You can find us at www.dayblandconsulting.com.
Thank you very much. Jeff, over to you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. I'm Jeff Jokish, a partner at Obscure IQ. You can find us at obscureiq.com. We provide privacy recovery solutions.
Excellent. Short, sweet. Appreciate that. Jamal, you're up.
AI and data privacy are evolving fast, and if businesses, you can't afford to fall behind. So I help organizations cut through the complexity of privacy, governance, and compliance, turning regulatory challenges into a competitive advantage. Through Kasian privacy experts, we provide top-tier consultancy, training, and tailored privacy programs to ensure your business stays compliant and secure while scaling your AI-driven systems. And with Privacy Pros Academy, we empower professionals to master privacy laws, gain globally recognized certifications, and accelerate their careers. So whether you're a business that wants to de-risk your AI initiatives or a professional looking to lead in data privacy, we've got the expertise, the frameworks, and the community to help you succeed.
So very well said. Thank you, Jamal. And Mark, our moderator.
So at Contoral.com, we help more than 30% of the Fortune 500, lots of small, mid-sized organizations, nonprofits, public sector organizations, both with information governance and AI governance. We help organizations put together real-world, workable AI governance programs. We can engage. We have attorneys on staff, certified records managers, certified information privacy professionals, deep expertise in AI and regulatory environments and technology. And we're really good about helping our clients put all this together to get something that not only reduces risk and ensures compliance, but also works and helps get them a competitive advantage. And so, we could be reached at Contoral.com.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. For the audience, if you came in late or missed any portion of the show and would like to dive in deeper to this topic and explore more things involving enterprise technology, we always encourage you to visit our always-on destination for your enterprise tech needs, InsightJam.com. Newly refurbished with a brand new logo and color scheme. Hope to see you over there. Or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, just north of 720,000 subscribers already. A great place for panel highlights, weekly podcasts, expert advice, and a whole lot more. Speaking of which, don't go anywhere, because in just a few short minutes, we'll be back with our next expert keynote. University of Chicago professor Dave Cameron is going to be discussing From Insight to Impact, the people powering AI. You don't want to miss that. But until then, thank you, as always, for watching and listening. My name is Jonathan, and we hope you have a great afternoon.
For video highlights, replays, and more, visit InsightJam.com.